Hey friends, so today I want to talk to you a little bit about something God has been teaching me concerning being in fight or flight mode and how do we get out of this and why is this really important for us as believers. I'm just now kind of putting together all of the pieces from these little things that he's been showing me. The way I'm going to explain this, you got to put your thinking cap on because I myself am going to be jumping from idea to idea. It's not going to be a 3 steps to understanding how to get out of fight or flight mode. So just stay with me and try to hold on to what I'm saying because it might be useful for you later if it's not useful for you already right now. So let me start by saying, like, a couple of weeks ago, God had put a message on my heart to share with you guys. I recorded it and it was about this very topic of fight or flight mode, but for some reason I didn't really want to post it. And it was more so like my own, just being in my own feelings. But lo and behold, God even used that to layer on some knowledge since then. So I see now he managed to work it out in a way that it's beneficial for everybody involved. What I was wanting to first explain, then I'll start to explain now, and then I'll add on the layers. So at that time, the thing that God had spoken to me was, you're not lazy, you're just in fight or flight mode. I was thinking to myself, how often and how many of us can relate to that feeling of, you know what you're called to be doing, you have some ideas on your heart, or maybe you've even started some of the projects that God has told you that he wants you to do, but then you know what happens. We find ourselves taking a little break from it, and then the break turns even longer, or we take a couple of steps forward but then we take a couple more back, or we just feel like we're not moving and getting things done at the pace that we would like, and that can be really, really disheartening. It can just be difficult. Like, let's just be honest, it can be difficult. It can even make you feel kind of down and depressed, because I believe the way God has built us, when he puts those gifts inside of us and he has an assignment for us to fulfill in the earth, which he does for everybody, when we're not moving in that, when we're not operating in that, it can make us feel almost like meaningless, purposeless, right? It's only when we start getting into and doing the things that he is like uniquely gifted us to do, and we move in that we feel really fulfilled, and we feel really like, oh my gosh, like your energy just feels like you're in alignment with what you're here to do, literally. So all that being said, right, we can start to feel down, we can start to feel depressed. When I get like that, I start feeling like, am I lazy? And I really was like asking God that, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I just do the things that I want to do? Why can't I just like do the goals and the vision that you've given me in a consistent manner, right? Because when I do it, I'm knocking it out the park, but then it feels difficult and there's so much resistance at other times. And that's when God was explaining this concept to me. You're not lazy, you're in fight or flight mode. And that same thing may really resonate with a lot of you, because I think, well, first let me explain a little bit more about what does that even mean, right? Because we hear that phrase, fight or flight mode, but really technically there's 3, right? There's fight, there's flight, and there's freeze. So fight would be when you're faced with this challenge, you're faced with this Goliath that's running up on you, and you're like, I'm at the point where I need to fight. Like, I'm going to need to defend myself, right? So you physically, or in whatever way, with words, whatever, you confront the situation. And there's flight, is when you would run away from the situation, right? So you either, like, you could physically run away from a physical threat, or you can avoid, right? You can practice avoidance, you can practice procrastination. Those are more like flight. And then freeze is when you literally don't even know what to do. You just are stuck. So there's no movement, right? Like, that could be literally in a real situation. You stay there in front of the threat, or it could be you just are stagnant, right? Like, spiritually, many of you can relate to that feeling of like, why is nothing happening for me right now, God? You said that this and that is part of my destiny, and I don't see anything happening. So the freeze can also be lack of motion on your part too, right? It can be, why am I not doing anything? Why am I not taking steps towards the things that God told me are for me? So you have your fight, you have your flight, and you have your freeze. And something that God was showing me, and this is where, like I said, the layers were coming on, was one, he was showing me, like, you're not lazy, you're in fight or flight mode, meaning that when we've gone through certain things, right? Many of us have experienced trauma of some sort, whether it's a big trauma threat in your life, or whether it's consistent little things that have happened through your life or in your childhood. Those do actually rewire the way that we respond to things, right? And our brain naturally is hardwired with the intention of keeping us safe, not only in a physical sense, but also even in a emotional sense. That's why people always talk about getting out of the comfort zone. We are hardwired to stay in the place where we just feel safe. It doesn't really matter that the best of the best of the best is on the other side of the comfort zone. Only our own ability to push ourselves forward and push ourselves past our own fear and our own comfort is going to get us there. Otherwise, most people spend their lives living in their comfort zone, living just a little bit mediocre, like just way below what God could have done through them, because they're scared and because they're stuck in their fight or flight mode because of these traumas and different things that they've gone through. You're not lazy. Like, get that out of your mind, right? Get that out of your head. You can do it, right? You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. But the thing is, we have a real enemy, right? Yes, the devil is a defeated foe, but he works very hard at his job. He outworks a lot of people on this earth. And that's why so many of us keep dealing with these like feelings of being stuck, feelings of knowing what we want to do, but feeling like we're never actually attaining it because we're just doing the same. We're in the comfort zone. We're operating where it feels safe, right? Whether being safe is just going to your same job all the time, whether being safe is staying in a relationship that you don't belong in, whether being safe is just being in the same kind of patterns, right? Like you like to eat certain types of things that don't benefit your mind and your body, or you do other habits that make you feel tired and drained and affect your ability to show up for the other areas of life that you should be showing up in. If we want to really be pursuing like God's best for our life and what we know that we're assigned to, we really need to think about like, am I in fight or fight mode and how do I get out of this? Because this is where, this part, okay. God was also showing me that it is to the benefit of the enemy that you not only stay in fight or fight mode, but that a lot of times we're not even aware that we get to this point, right? Like, I'll speak for myself. It wasn't until maybe like 2-3 years ago that I realized that was my way of living. Like, I've been in that way since life, like since my whole life. And it was with the Lord's help that he started to show me what it's like to really truly live a peaceful existence, like to live a life where I trust that everything that I need, that he's literally going to provide it, that everywhere that I go, that I'm going to be safe, that everything is accounted for concerning me. So many of us, even though we have access to God, we never attain that level of rest, right? Like doing things, but also resting in the truth that he's accounted for everything concerning you and he looks over you. So when you're not in that place, right, it's easy to just be in that fight, that flight, or that freeze, like focusing on the lower level thoughts of life, the lower level activities of life. That's why sometimes we see, and many of us have been in this stage of life, we see people who like, it's almost like they're living for the weekend. They go to work, they manage to do these perfunctory things, like they wash the dishes, they send their kids to school, but then they're like thriving, or they think they're thriving when they get 2 to 4 hours to go to the club or to do whatever else that they like to do, go hook up with their boo or whatever. Like they're living for the weekend because they're operating at a very low level where those are the types of things that they're doing to try to soothe themselves. Literally, they're trying to self-soothe with substances, with things that don't really bring lasting peace or lasting enjoyment. Versus when we get out of that mode of like our nervous system is triggered, we're not at peace. When we get out of that mode, then we're able to really just rest in life, rest in everything, like rest in every way. Like I said, just knowing that everything concerning your life is aligned and that God has got it under control and that you're going to do what you need to do because that's just what you're going to do. So anyhow, the enemy again has an investment in keeping you into that mode, right? Sometimes we'll get out of it. Like me, same, that's what happened to me. I started to come into an like awakening of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is how I'm living, and starting to learn practices to again, like regulate the nervous system. I started to pursue different ways of like looking at my life, looking at my trauma, looking at the things that were hindering me, and starting to like unravel those things to release their hold on me, mostly through prayer, but also through whatever else God would lead me to, therapy or books that he would tell me to read, and just, being intentional about healing the areas that he was showing me in different ways. So I want to share that with y'all because just as much as we can get to that point, the enemy wants you to fall back. He wants you to like forget that you are entitled to being in a place of rest, that you are entitled to fulfilling everything that God has for you. That's why Jesus says in John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they might have life and have life more abundantly. That's so good. So think about that, right? The enemy is invested. He has an investment because when you are operating at your worst, right? When you're at a low level, when you're not even like trying to thrive and fulfill, the business idea that God gave you, working on your relationship with your husband or your wife, like investing into your kids, your family, your mind, like the things that are going to produce fruit in your life, then you're operating at that low level, and he can still manipulate you. He can still get you involved in the vices of this world. And all of those things feed, that's an analogy, but they feed the spirits, the evil spirits and the kingdom of darkness. They thrive off of those things, right? Like, you know, um, when people fight, when people drink themselves into a stupor, when people fornicate, all of those types of low level activities, it's kind of like almost like where demons get their energy from, right? When they come to reside in a human and influence a human, and then they see that that person does those things, that like feeds them, and they get more of a stronghold in a person, versus when you are doing the things of God, right? When you're following God's commands and you're even operating in the things that He set out for you to do. The word actually says, I'm paraphrasing, but He's actually set it out in advance, assignments and things that He wants us to do, that He has specifically for you, right? So anything the enemy can do to keep you from that, to keep you from actualizing the specific gifts that God has given you and thriving, and most of the times the gifts that He's given us have to do with us helping other people and us setting other people free and helping them to thrive. Things that, magnify God's kingdom here versus things that magnify the enemy's kingdom. So he wants you to stay in fight or flight mode for those reasons. And that's all the more reason why we have to push against that, why we have to be cognizant to look at our life, look at our habits, look at like, am I falling back toward those patterns, or do I even know what life is like not in fight or flight mode? All that's to say, you're not lazy. And one more thing I want to point out is, as you start to get out of that fight or flight mode, you may still find yourself feeling kind of like tired, kind of like sluggish, which you would think that you would just break out of it right away and you would start doing the things that you weren't able to do before. But what happens is, in a natural sense, right? Like when we're thinking about our physical body, like when we're in fight or flight mode, when we have high cortisol, when we are always stressed or like operating on edge, our body never really gets that true kind of rest that I was talking about. So we may sleep for a couple of hours, but we're not really at rest, right? Like there's things that are happening in the body when you're constantly under stress, chronic stress, right? They talk about how that's a killer. When you start to unravel all of those cords and you do start to like scratch the surface of like, what is a restful life like? What is it like to not be in fight or flight mode? You'll actually find sometimes that your body is almost like catching up to, oh, this is what it's like to be at rest. And then you do kind of want to have quality sleep, have time to rest, have time to be outdoors, to relax, to do those things. And all of those things actually, even though you may feel like they're, again, lazy or like not productive, they are feeding you in the right way, right? We need to rest. That's how we were made. Doing those things that bring life, that bring peace to you, they're feeding you, and they're feeding the good parts of your spirit in the right way. So don't be alarmed if you find that in the beginning you have that feeling of like, oh, like I thought this would feel different. It actually feels very restful, and it feels very serene when you start to leave that fight or flight mode. But stay alert, because again, the enemy, he roars around like a lion. He's looking for somebody to devour, and that could be through something as simple as keeping you in that chronic stress, bringing up your trauma, bringing up your triggers, sending somebody who he knows can ruffle your feathers. That's the kind of stuff, low level activity, that he thrives on. So you got to stay on your guard. You got to be watchful, and you have to be always guarding your own gates, your eye gates, your ear gates, guarding your heart, right? There's reasons why scripture says guard your heart above all things, because out of it flow the issues of life. So long story short, I hope that helped you. Be mindful of of whether you're in fight or flight mode, and also be mindful that the enemy thrives off of that, and that's all the more reason why we have to shift ourselves out of that, so that we can go ahead and do those things that God has set out for us to do, because those are the things that are going to really why we're here. Let's put it like that. That's why we're here, to do the things that God has called us to do, to reach the people that He's called us to reach, and not to be held back by our own, thoughts and like fake limitations that don't even really exist, because you are already free when you are in Christ. You're born again, you're made new, whom the sun sets free is free indeed. None of this stuff can hold you. So you just have to be aware and remember and be mindful of what's going on and of all of the tactics and the ploys of the kingdom of darkness and of the enemy. Hope that helps you. And I'm so glad that you tuned into this. Let me know any thoughts or feelings in the comments, and I'll see you again soon.